While Jasmine Crockett, the young congresswoman from the U.S. Congress, was still fumbling to find her footing in internal debates on the other side of the ocean, interim president, Ibrahim Traoré had become a name mentioned by the whole world. Decisive cunning and full of ambition. Jasmine's inexperience was placed in direct confrontation with Traoré's ruthless power, like two opposing poles of global politics. An unexpected phone call, an unintentional tear, and a barrage of questions in Congress turned her into the center of ridicule. But is Jasmine merely a pawn in the hands of a scheming African leader? Or will she be the one daring to turn the tables? Jasmine Crockett sat silently in the congressional meeting room, her hands tightly gripping a stack of documents that she knew few people wanted to read. Amid a forest of veteran lawmakers, her voice was like a small needle dropping in a noisy courtroom, heard for a second, then vanishing amid the gavel strikes, throat clearings, and half-mocking laughter. People looked at Jasmine as if she were a decorative symbol, a youthful, diverse face, but harmless. They mentioned her at cocktail parties as proof of politics inclusivity, not because of any memorable speeches, but in that very moment, as she struggled to find a gap to insert herself into the debate on the other side of the hemisphere, Ibrahim Traoré, a man her age, was being hailed as the symbol of a new era. French media called him a subtle threat to the international order. African news outlets praised him as the young leader daring to break colonial chains. On the global chessboard, Traoré wasn't just a piece he claimed to be the one flipping the entire board. That contrast made Jasmine's name seem out of place. Same generation, but while an African man commanded the military-issued decrees and shifted relations with Russia and China and Washington, the young woman was only debating school budgets and healthcare reform. The American press loved headlines like Jasmine Crockett, the soft voice of the Democratic Party's internals. The word soft in the media's mouth was a polite way of saying weak. That day's questioning session was supposed to focus on domestic issues. But a reporter suddenly raised their hand. "Congresswoman, what are your thoughts on the recent statement by Burkina Faso's interim president Ibrahim Traoré that small nations have the right to arm themselves and decide their own fate?" The whole room froze. Jasmine was caught off guard, her throat tightening. It wasn't her prepared field. She pursed her lips, trying to brush it off. But the eyes of colleagues' cameras and the public bore into her like surgical lights on an operating table. A second of hesitation was enough for the press to mock her for a whole week. I think every nation should respect international law." She stammered, eyes darting around, and global security issues need to be resolved through dialogue. The generic bland response immediately became fodder for laughter on Twitter. One account sarcastically wrote, "Crockett talks dialogue with Traoré like teaching a crocodile to go vegan." Hashtag Pseudo Low IQ Congresswoman exploded again, this time not from Trump, but from audiences waiting to see her stumble. In her office that night, Jasmine turned on the TV. On the screen, Ibrahim Traoré appeared in military uniform, his eyes blazing like someone convinced of his destiny. He declared, "We will no longer bow our heads. Burkina Faso will decide its future with its own hands, not with permission from Washington or Paris." The Ouagadougou hall erupted in cheers. The crowd raised his photos high, hailing him as a hero daring to speak for the community. At the same time, Jasmine's phone buzzed with messages from voters, press colleagues. "You've just been directly compared to Traoré. One side is explosive leadership, the other is you." In the mirror, Jasmine's face reflected wet eyes. Not tears of weakness, but of humiliation. In American politics, where every word and gesture is scrutinized, she knew that moment of hesitation had etched her name into the list of those easily crushed. Ironically, Jasmine's vulnerability made internal political factions start seeing value in her. To them, she could become a tool, a harmless, controllable pawn to test in bigger games. And rumors began leaking. The Foreign Affairs Committee will summon Crockett to respond to his views toward Africa. In a closed meeting, a veteran lawmaker smirked, Put this kid in front of the cameras. Let Traoré see we're not afraid. If she stumbles even better, she'll take all the criticism for us. On the other side of the ocean, Ibrahim Traoré watched the situation with a cold smile. In a press meeting, when asked about Jasmine Crockett, he slightly curled his lip. Young sheep are often sent out first to test the bait for wolves. The statement spread across Twitter like wildfire. A young African leader mentions a young American congresswoman in a contemptuous tone, and despite the rudeness, the public applauded, because people love drama blood and watching a novice torn apart on live TV. In that moment, Jasmine understood she was no longer just a congresswoman from a small district. She had been pulled into an international chess game where her inexperience was amplified to contrast with the brutality of another leader. She was the shadow to highlight Traoré's aura, but deep down, Jasmine didn't want to remain a victim forever. Being mocked for clumsiness was one thing, but being turned into a puppet in the hands of power players, that was unbearable. And right when her phone vibrated, an international unknown number displayed, her heart pounded. This is the office of the interim president of Burkina Faso. Mr. Traoré wants to speak with you. The space in her room froze. On one side, ridicule in Congress. On the other, the shadow of power from Africa. Jasmine brought the phone to her ear, voice trembling but firm. "I'm listening." And that was the moment her personal history began. No longer boring budget debates, no longer a name mocked on Twitter. From this second, Jasmine Crockett officially stepped into the vortex of global politics, where a tear or a slip of the tongue could shake the international chessboard. The phone rang in the congressional office, the shrill sound echoing like an alarm siren in a dark bunker. The secretary fumbled, whispering, "There's an international call direct line from Burkina Faso. The caller claims to be Interim President Ibrahim Traoré." The atmosphere immediately thickened. Jasmine's small meeting room suddenly became the center of the global political map, as if the world's axis had landed right on the old wooden desk, where she usually drank cold coffee. Astonished glances from assistants poured toward her, a young congresswoman once seen only as a decorative voice in subcommittees. Now unexpectedly the point of contact for an African military leader, causing headaches for the UN, France, and the US. Jasmine gripped the phone tightly. Traoré's voice came through deep, heavy, steady, like a hammer pounding on a wooden table in a military trial. "Congresswoman Crockett, I'm calling not to negotiate but to inform. Today in Kaya, a bomb exploded in a school compound. Many children died. Even international volunteers were killed. Blood stained the schoolyard, and the world, if it refuses to see, will bear responsibility." Jasmine was stunned and silent. Assistants exchanged looks signaling to cut the line, but it was too late. American TV stations were recording the moment live. Cameras captured every detail, her shaking hand, tears welling in her eyes. But why call me?" Jasmine uttered softly, almost whispering. Traoré emphasized each word like a cold bullet piercing through safety glass. "Because you're in the U.S. Congress, and the U.S. Congress is fond of declaring on human rights. I want to know, what will you say to the dead children?" The sound was deathly quiet. Only Jasmine's rapid breathing remained. The whole of America through screens witnessed the young congresswoman bow her head, shoulders, trembling, tears streaming down. In politics, crying isn't a crime, but crying at the wrong time in the wrong way is a death sentence. The news outlets didn't miss the chance. CNN ran the headline, "U.S. Congresswoman bursts into tears hearing news from Burkina Faso." Fox News coldly, "Crockett when tears replace resolve." A tabloid mocked with, "Who says Congress lacks drama? Watch Crockett perform." Jasmine wasn't performing. That tear was real, a shock no one could prepare for. But politics never asks if it's real or fake. Politics only asks, can it be exploited? While she slumped over her desk in Ouagadougou, Traoré stepped onto the press podium. Before a forest of lenses, he didn't cry. He clenched his fist, voice booming like a drum. "Right now I've informed the U.S. Congress," a young congresswoman cried. "I respect her empathy. But I want to remind the whole world we don't need tears. We need action. Weapons to protect children. Real aid, not empty promises. The hall exploded in applause. Traoré had just turned Jasmine's private tier into his own political capital. He seized her weakness, twisted it into a propaganda weapon. In Washington, Jasmine was swept into a storm of criticism. Political opponents within her party pounced. A conservative lawmaker stood up in session snarling, "This Congress isn't a stage for someone to burst into tears on a phone call. We need leaders, not live TV tragedies." On social media, the hashtag #WasCryingCongresswoman erupted. Short video clips of her wiping tears were turned into memes overlaid with comedy music. One vicious commenter, "Burkina Faso drops bombs, America gets congressional tears." Jasmine sat motionless in her office, eyes red, listening to the nonstop ringing phone. Some reporters called for emotional interviews. A few human rights activists wanted to meet immediately, exploiting the moment to push aid bills. But most were mocking emails attacks. Her inner self was torn. Had she shot herself in the foot one moment of lost control, and her career was being strangled? But deep in her chest, a small but persistent voice echoed, "If they want to turn tears into weapons, I won't let them steal it easily." Meanwhile, Traoré continued playing the big game. He appeared on Al Jazeera BBC France 24, always repeating the same detail, "A U.S. Congresswoman cried for us." His voice wasn't mocking, but pounding like a rhetorical attack. Don't say Burkina Faso is forgotten. When children's blood spills, even lawmakers in Washington can't hold back tears. So why hasn't aid arrived yet? As outlets repeated that line, Jasmine realized she had become an unwilling symbol, not of human rights nor solidarity, but of weakness. A piece controlled by others, yet also an unavoidable highlight in the power game. That night before the mirror, Jasmine wiped her eyes dry, whispering to herself, "Fine, they laugh at my crying, but next time I'll make them cry." The U.S. Congress that day was packed not for any major bill, but for a tear. Jasmine Crockett entered the meeting room with stiff shoulders, knowing every lens was aimed at her. The atmosphere was no different from a public trial where the defendant was convicted by glances before speaking. The Foreign Affairs Committee chair banged the gavel, voice dry. We begin the questioning related to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and the phone call from Burkina Faso's interim president, Mr. Ibrahim Traoré. Immediately, a barrage of questions poured in, like rapid gunfire from multiple directions. Why did he call you directly, not the Secretary of State? Is there any secret agreement between you and that military regime? Are you aware you've inadvertently become Traoré's propaganda mouthpiece? Each question was a knife stab, and cameras panned her expressions, forced, smile eyes trying to stay calm, hands trembling under the table. The nation watched the interrogation like a secret trial gone public. In American politics, direct contact isn't an honor, but a suspicion. A foreign leader, especially a military one, doesn't bypass official diplomatic channels to call a relatively unknown young lawmaker without reason. And the question hanging in that icy room was why Jasmine Crockett? She responded, voice trying to maintain a steady rhythm. I didn't initiate it. I received the unexpected call. I didn't speak for anyone. I just reacted to a humanitarian tragedy. But that answer was like pouring oil on fire. An opposition lawmaker snorted, tapping his pen on the table. Reacted with tears. The room echoed with mocking laughs and murmurs. Cameras captured Jasmine biting her lip, hard eyes glistening, but refusing to let another tear fall. Outside Congress, the press had a field day with headlines. Jasmine, Traoré's humanitarian mouthpiece. Who's controlling the young Congresswoman? Lengthy analyses in major papers pointed out Traoré was shrewder than all. He didn't need to meet the U.S. Secretary of State officially, nor attend an international conference. Just by making a lawmaker cry on a call, he turned her into a living witness for the tragedy and used it to call for global aid. In the international media's eyes, Jasmine's image was now tied to Traoré's name. He was the daring speaker, she the one who cried. An unwilling humanitarian symbol, a flesh and blood proof that Burkina Faso's children's blood could shake the U.S. legislature. In her small office, Jasmine slammed the newspaper stack on the table. "I'm not anyone's propaganda tool," she shouted, but her voice was hoarse like yelling into emptiness. Her political aide Malik sighed, "But the press has already assigned you the role. In this game, truth doesn't matter. They only care who cries, who speaks, and who exploits the frame." Wos! Those words pierced Jasmine's heart like an unappealing verdict. In politics, the weak aren't allowed to make mistakes, and if they err, the system uses that error as fuel to crush them. While she fumbled to defend herself in Ouagadougou, Traoré wore a calm smile before dozens of reporters. He held up photos of the dead children, then declared, "Even in Washington, a U.S. Congresswoman burst into tears over children's blood. What is the world waiting for to provide aid?" That image spread like a storm. Every time he mentioned Jasmine, it deepened her political wound. In international eyes, she was no longer a U.S. Congresswoman, but Traoré's witness. In Washington, her colleagues whispered, "The kid's tied up now. Every time his name is mentioned, people will remember her tear." In congressional hallways, a few seasoned faces looked at her with half pity, half glee. They knew a budding political career could collapse without an election. Internally, Jasmine screamed. She couldn't bear being turned into a puppet. Each mockery, each headline was like an indictment pushing her into a corner with no escape. That evening before the mirror, Jasmine stared at herself. Tired face, swollen red eyes, but a spark of fire in the depths. She whispered, "They want to turn me into a tool, I'll turn that very role into a counterattack." Amid the mockery accusations and weight of hundreds of cameras, Jasmine decided next time questioned she wouldn't evade. She'd use Traoré's name that wound turned the tables, but how the question hung in the quiet room like a lurking ghost. Jasmine Crockett sat in the dark room with only the desk lamp shining on the thick stack of documents. The papers had blurred print, but to her, they glowed like life-saving kindling. The person who delivered the dossier, an independent journalist once in intelligence, said only one sentence before vanishing into the night. "This information could kill your career or save it. Depends on how you use it." She flipped each page, classified report scene photos, anonymous testimonies. All painted a terrifying picture: explosions, massacres labeled terrorism by international media, but many actually orchestrated by military forces loyal to Traoré. Crimes staged children's blood, exploited to consolidate power. Jasmine gripped the dossier tightly. From a ridiculed victim, she suddenly held a weapon. And in politics, no one laughs at the one with the gun. That day's congressional session was jammed the air thick. Reporters crammed in, ready to capture another Crockett failure. Many lawmakers whispered, "Probably crying again today." The committee chair banged the gavel, continuing the questioning of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on connections to Burkina Faso. Cameras panned to her. But this time, Jasmine didn't tremble. She stood straight, placing a thick envelope before her eyes, cold as steel. "Dear colleagues, dear public watching. Last week I became a laughingstock when a military leader called and forced me into passivity. I was labeled a mouthpiece. But today, I come not to cry. I come to present evidence." The room buzzed. She opened the envelope documents, spilling like indictments. The large screen behind lit up blurry but clear images, intelligence reports, maps, satellite photos. Jasmine's voice boomed steady and firm like a hammer blow. "This dossier shows that at least 3 recent violent incidents in Kaya and Ouahigouya were not caused by international terrorism, but staged by armed forces under Traoré's command. They indirectly incited violent elements to bomb schools, killing civilians, then used that blood to call for aid and justify tightening military power." A breathless silence. Lawmakers ready with sarcasm suddenly fell quiet, eyes darting. Press scribbled furiously, keyboards clacking like drums. Jasmine continued her gaze, sweeping the room like a prosecutor. "Last week I was asked, Why did Traoré call you? The answer is clear. He needed an emotional witness. He needed an American tear to turn into propaganda. And I, a young congresswoman, was turned into a puppet. But today I cut the strings myself. Her voice lowered sharp as a scalpel. This is no longer Burkina Faso's issue. It's the world's will we let humanitarianism be manipulated as a political tool. Will we let children's blood become capital for power? The hall was silent as death. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine's face, no longer the tear shedder, but a prosecutor's ready to indict a foreign leader right in the U.S. Congress. A conservative lawmaker, her fiercest critic, sat pale and silent. Others nodded slightly. And for the first time, instead of mocking laughs, Jasmine heard the silence of respect. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré watched the live broadcast. He sat with arms-crossed eyes darkening as he heard Crockett in a completely different context. No longer a crying victim, but an exposé. His aide whispered, "Mr. President, she's flipped the chessboard." Traoré narrowed his eyes, growling, "A pawn can become a queen if it reaches the end. But I won't let it go that far." The next day, the American press flipped tones. From tears to Axe Jasmine Crockett counterattacks. The Washington Post wrote, "She's no longer the novice." She presented evidence and silenced the room. Huadait. Twitter exploded hashtag Dajader's truth bomb, competing with Shahzaid crying congresswoman. One wrote, "They laughed when she cried. Now they are silent when she speaks." A satirical account posted, "Plot twist Crockett isn't a mouthpiece but a truth speaker." In her office, Jasmine sat quietly, hands still shaking post-battle, but eyes bright as reborn. Malik entered, placing coffee before her. "You just flipped the board," he said with a slight smile. Jasmine nodded slightly. She knew this wasn't the final victory, but it was the turning point, the first time she wasn't passive in Traoré's game. That night, looking out the brightly lit Washington window, Jasmine whispered to herself, "Traoré, you thought I was just a pawn. But remember, this board is long, and I've never feared blood. I only fear silence." No longer weak tears. This time her eyes were fire. The U.S. congressional chamber blazed with the glare of television lights packed to the brim with reporters. On the large screen at the back of the room, a ticker scrolled Foreign Affairs Committee, discusses African aid policy. But everyone knew today wasn't about Africa. It was about one name, Jasmine Crockett. The committee chair struck the gavel. "We will now hear perspectives regarding the dossier Congresswoman Crockett released last week." Murmurs erupted like a disturbed beehive. For the past week, the press had relentlessly dissected every word, every detail of that dossier. Those who once mocked Jasmine now tread more cautiously. No one dared openly endorse her, but their silence spoke volumes. She was no longer dismissed. A conservative lawmaker rose his tone, a mix of sarcasm and wariness. "Ms. Crockett, are you aware that releasing that dossier could destabilize U.S. Burkina Faso diplomatic relations, or are you trying to turn Congress into a stage for your personal career?" Cameras swiveled straight to Jasmine. She sat resolute, her gaze ice cold. No more tears, no more trembling. Her response cut through the air, each word sharp as a blade. "Dear colleague, this stage has never been about me personally. It's about truth. And the truth is, this aid cannot keep flowing into the hands of a military regime if civilian blood is being exploited by that very regime. If we ignore that the ones turning Congress into a stage aren't me, they're the ones trading blood for money." The room fell silent. Many lawmakers, though they didn't speak, betrayed their understanding through averted gazes. This young woman had just turned the tide. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré stepped onto the press podium. Unlike his usual commanding presence today, he appeared restrained, his smile half-forced. "We," he said, "have always sought transparency. Burkina Faso needs aid, not defamation. If there are missteps within our military, we are prepared to investigate." A brief statement, but enough for the world to see. For the first time, Ibrahim Traoré didn't strike back. He conceded. CNN flashed breaking news: Traoré admits need for greater transparency. MSNBC analyzed Jasmine Crockett from tears to forcing an international leader to yield. Even Fox News, which had once mercilessly mocked her, could only grudgingly report young Congresswoman unexpectedly shifts the game. In the congressional hallways, colleagues began to shift their demeanor. A veteran lawmaker approached Jasmine, his voice low. "You did what many of us wouldn't dare. I'm not saying I agree with everything, but—" He paused. "You've proven you're no joke." Jasmine merely smiled. She knew that in politics, praise often carried less weight than silence. And today, that silence tilted in her favor. At the press conference following the session, a reporter asked point-blank Congresswoman Crockett, "Do you believe you've become an equal rival to Burkina Faso's interim president?" Jasmine paused for a moment, then gave a faint smile and replied, "I don't aim to be anyone's rival. I only want to be an ally of truth. If truth puts me on equal footing with a head of state, that's not my ambition, it's the consequence of the power game they constructed." Her words spread like wildfire. Twitter exploded. Ally of truth. From tears to truth. One user wrote, "She's not fighting Traoré. She's fighting the blood game." Another quipped sardonically, "Breaking news Crockett from tissue to tomahawk." That night in her office, Jasmine sat alone. Newspapers piled high their bold headlines showcasing her face-off with Traoré. Just weeks ago, she was the crying Congresswoman. Today, she was described as the one who forced a military leader to back down. Malik stepped in a sly grin on his face. "You've just gone toe-to-toe with an international head of state. Not bad for someone once called a decorative symbol, huh?" Jasmine gazed out the window, Washington's cityscape glowing like a colossal chessboard. Her eyes no longer held fear, but resolve. "No," she replied softly. "It's bad for them, actually. They thought I only knew how to cry." The next day, a major outlet published a concluding line. Politics sometimes hinges on a single moment. For Jasmine Crockett, that moment began with a tear and ended with forcing the world to listen. The wooden gavel echoed in the congressional meeting room like a period ending a stormy chain of days. But really, it wasn't the end, but the beginning. The committee has decided to establish the Subcommittee on International Aid Oversight, the chair declared, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett will serve as permanent vice chair. The room buzzed. People once laughed at her tears, mocked her as a mouthpiece for an African military leader. Yet now, the U.S. Congress had to admit no one was more deserving than her to oversee the truth. Reporters rushed out typing madly on phones. 10 minutes later, the New York Times ran Crockett from tears to policy. The Washington Post wrote bluntly, "The one turning tear into sword." And CNN didn't miss new shining star of U.S. Congress. In her office, Jasmine sat at the desk, eyes glued to the newly passed resolution. Malik placed a hot-off-the-press newspaper before her, voice half joking, half serious. "Congratulations, the one turning tears into policy." Jasmine smirked, but her eyes stayed alert. "They think this is the end," she said softly. "But really, this is when the game begins." While Washington shook with a rising political star in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré sat in the National Security Meeting Room, face cold as ice. Intelligence reports laid before him clearly Burkina Faso's international credibility plummeted after the exposés. Many quietly supportive nations now paused aid, awaiting more transparency. A general worried, "Mr. President, Western opinion is drilling hard on human rights. If not adjusted, the sanctions risk is high." Traoré tapped his fingers rhythmically on the table, slowly saying, "Domestically, we'll be even tougher. But outwardly, we'll soften. If the enemy wants a smile, we'll give them a smile. But inside, our hand still holds the knife." That was the dual strategy violence against domestic people, shrewd diplomacy internationally. And of course, Jasmine Crockett's name now became his personal obsession. Because in just weeks, an unknown young lawmaker turned him from Africa's young lion into someone explaining to international media. In the U.S. Congress, the first hearing of the International Aid Oversight Subcommittee took place. The room was set like a courtroom, harsh lights, thick dossiers like indictments. Jasmine tapped her pen lightly on the table, voice firm. We won't provide unconditional aid anymore. Every aid package must be public with independent oversight mechanisms. We can't let another drop of blood be exploited for power. Those words fell like a sentence. A few elderly lawmakers accustomed to old ways frowned but didn't object. Public pressure was too strong, and Jasmine now embodied reform. The press called it Crockett's moment, when a tear turned into law. Parallel behind the scenes, Jasmine faced another reality. Fame meant risk. Threatening emails appeared. A few colleagues subtly warned, "Careful, you've touched money flows no one wants public." Jasmine knew she'd stepped out of safety, but this time, she wasn't alone. A group of young lawmakers, once silent, sought her. They didn't declare publicly, but nods, brief handshakes in hallways showed she had allies. In a live NBC interview, the host asked, "What do you think now that your name is mentioned alongside Traoré?" An international head, Jasmine, looked straight at the camera, unblinking. "I don't care about standing with or against anyone. I only care, will children's blood still be turned into political tools? If that question puts me equal to a head of state, that's their choice, not mine." The studio audience was silent for seconds, then applauded thunderously. The clip went viral on social media, #Toiger's policy not tears, trending top. One commented, "She's shifted from emotion to institution. That's real politics." In Ouagadougou, Traoré kept up appearances. He appeared on state TV smiling calmly, talking about humanitarian reform and transparency commitment. But in the military, he tightened his suppression, ensuring no domestic doubt of his power. The world saw the smile, but Burkina Faso's people knew behind it were swords. And that irony amplified the weight of Jasmine's disclosed dossier. Late at night in her office, Jasmine sat alone by the window. Washington City glowed like an endless chessboard. She recalled the tear-falling moment, the mockery from all Congress, then the moment she placed the dossier, silencing the room. "People call me the one turning tears into policy," she whispered, "but truth is I just turned humiliation into a weapon." On the desk, a small wooden gavel, a memento from a veteran colleague, lay still. Jasmine picked it up, tapping lightly on the table. The dry sound echoed. Not an end, but an opening. Because from today, she was no longer the young congresswoman who cried. She was the one turning a weak moment into a reform process. And American politics from now must reckon with Jasmine Crockett as a real force.